I'd like to begin with a prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Grant, O merciful God, that we may ardently desire, prudently examine, truthfully acknowledge, and perfectly accomplish what is pleasing to Thee for the praise and glory of Thy name. Amen.
Amen.
It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology. My name is Father Albert Dugan. I'm the president of the school. What is the school? Many of you obviously are familiar with it, your students and your faculty members, but for those of you who are visiting or less frequently here, I wanted to share with you the mission statement of our school, which was recently updated. The Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology is a community of scholars committed to the pursuit of truth as revealed in the gospel and discovered by human reason. Inspired by the Dominican practice of disciplined inquiry and learned preaching, the school draws its students into the rich tradition of classical philosophy and Catholic theology, especially as exemplified by St. Thomas Aquinas, and from this tradition engages contemporary scholarship and culture in mutual enrichment. As a center of studies of the Order of Preachers and an apostolate of the Western Dominican province, its foundational mission is to provide intellectual and priestly formation for Dominican student brothers, while preparing all of its students, religious, clerics, and laity, for academic and apostolic vocations. I wanted to share that with you because it is what we are about here, and it is what we are here for today. I'd like to point out members of our faculty who are joining us today, both in the philosophy department and theology department. If you could please stand. Thank you. This is, of course, the convocation of the school's College of Fellows. College of Fellows supports this mission of the school by bringing together a wonderful collection of academics, those in the professions, those who have lived lives of public service, all of them gathered together to bring these conversations to the fore. Yesterday we had the opportunity with many of our fellows to gather here to discuss the topic of this year's convocation in a more closed and intimate setting. I'd like to ask the fellows who are joining us here today to please stand. And we can give them a round of applause for helping to make this weekend a reality for us. The theme of this year's convocation is the brainchild of a couple of our fellows who were inspired by the recent election of Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope who, in choosing his name, hearkened back to Leo XIII. And obviously, there is something in a name. And the thought is that Pope Leo XIV wants to call on, among other things, the work of his predecessor in assessing the challenges of our time. So without knowing what this Pope was going to say, and we haven't yet seen an encyclical from Leo XIV, we wanted to begin to think about how his predecessor, Leo XIII's thought, might inspire his own thinking, how it's influenced how he came to the chair of St. Peter and what he might do in this 21st century context. I won't venture to give Professor Hittinger's keynote talk, that's for him to do, but just to set the setting for our gathering today. Finally, I'd like to introduce the man who will be introducing our keynote speaker. Yesterday, as part of the College of Fellows sessions, they had the opportunity to elect a new dean and unanimously elected Professor Scott Roniger, who is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Loyola Marymount University. He graciously stepped up as acting or interim dean because Dr. Hittinger asked to step down from this role in which he's been serving for so many years. Scott's done an admirable job and immediately won the support of all of the fellows who have asked him to serve as the next dean of the College of Fellows. So without further ado.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Father Albert. Thank you to all the faculty of the DSPT, all the administrators, all of the students, and of course, thank you to the fellows. I was elected dean yesterday. The roof has not caved in yet, but just give it time, and we'll see if we can't get that done. But of course, I also need to begin by thanking Russ, who's done a fantastic job as doing many things over the years, but one of the many that he's done so wonderfully well is served as Dean of the College of Fellows. And it's a great honor for me to take the baton from him. Russ has been a teacher for me, a mentor, a friend, a co-author, partner in crime, and through the DSPT we are also fellows now. So again, it's just a great honor for me to be here to introduce him. And as I've been saying, I mean, Russ is such an important and leading scholar of Catholic social teaching and natural law and really just the Catholic intellectual tradition in general that it's really become a second job for me, kind of a second full-time job, just announcing him and introducing him all over the world. So I've got 15 different introductions written for Russ, all of them slightly different, but this is the first time I've introduced him on Zoom. So there is at least something new in this one. And unfortunately, Russ was snowed in. He was iced in D.C., so there was an act of nature that has kept him from being here in person, but we're very grateful that at least he can be here via Zoom. So what a joy it is for me to introduce Russ, Francis Russell Hittinger III. Let me begin with just two texts from St. Thomas, which I think is quite fitting in many ways, that I think serve as a kind of doorway into Russ's own thinking, into the tradition that he knows and develops and presents so beautifully. In the so-called Treatise on Law, St. Thomas Aquinas says, quote, "For every law aims at establishing the friendship either of men with one another or of man with God. And so the whole of law is fulfilled in the single commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." End quote. In his commentary on the 5th Psalm, Aquinas highlights the fullness of joy of the saints in the fatherland and says that their joy is fully perfect and perfectly full because of, quote, "the society they enjoy, since man by himself is not able to rejoice well in anything, but only when he has friends with him as participants in his good." End quote. The nature, dignity, and joy of society, as well as the laws that promote it and the love of friendship that bonds its members together, have been among the main subjects of Russ Hittinger's remarkable career. In that career, which we are in many ways honoring today as he steps down as Dean of the College of Fellows, he's written over 100 scholarly articles, 4 books, including a very recent book, which is quite beautiful in many ways and quite profound, called On the Dignity of Society. Don't judge the book by its editor, because then you would underestimate the value of the book. He's also got a few more books in the works that he and I are working on. His publications have been translated into multiple languages, including Italian, French, and Polish. He's given more invited lectures than I care to count, including just about every major Catholic intellectual institute or lecture. He was for a while the only lay person in the world on not one but 2 pontifical academies, the Pontifical Academy of the Social Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of St. Thomas Aquinas. He's won multiple awards for his scholarly contributions, including the Pontifical Medal, Deus Scientiarum Dominus from Pope Benedict XVI. In the last couple years, he's gotten medals from the Fellowship of Catholic Scholars, the ACPA Aquinas Medal, the American Maritime Association. The awards and the honors go on and on and on. He's taught at Christendom College, Fordham University, Princeton University, the Catholic University of America twice, or maybe 3 times, depending on how we count. He held the Warren Chair of Catholic Studies at the University of Tulsa for 25 years. Most importantly, maybe for this audience, he taught at the University, he also taught at the University of Chicago, but most important for this audience, he taught here at the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology in Berkeley, where, of course, he was also awarded an honorary doctorate, and as we said, served as Dean of the College of Fellows for many years. He has been one of the leading lights of Catholic intellectual thought, philosophy, theology for many years now. And in all of these different places he's been, he's collected not good, but great stories along the way. Let me just say before I hand it over to Russ, our tradition is just that. It's a tradition. It has to be handed on. And the best way to hand it on, I'm convinced, is in friendship in the truth. And I think Russ is a remarkable example of handing on our tradition by bringing students and other faculty members and colleagues into an environment of friendship in the truth. And I know that my life has been greatly enriched because of my friendship in the truth with Russ. So with that, let me hand it over to the man of the hour. And the title of his talk for us today is Leo and a Tale of Two Republics. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thanks to Father Albert and to Scott for the introductions. And also, I must thank Father Michael Sweeney, who 16, 17 years ago invited me to give a talk in that very room and then tricked me into being the dean. And way to go, Father Sweeney. So, colleagues, students, friends, apologies for having to do this online, but there was no other way. So let me get right down to it. Leo was born in 1810. He died in 1903. So he's the first pope born in the 19th century, the first to die in the 20th century. In his mature age, let's say by 1870, he's still Archbishop of Perugia, 8 years from being Pope. There were only 3 republics in Europe. All of Europe, 3 republics. Now, 4 if we count San Marino. Whereas in the Americas, North and South, at that time, there were more than 20. That's the beginning of a story. 3 in all of Europe and 20 in the Americas. And so I want to try to explain important changes in Catholic teaching and the role of the Vatican, the pontifical role in dealing with republican governments, because there were 2 monsters by the time we have in the 1870s. And they were international monsters. They were huge and powerful. And that would be the French Third Republic and, of course, the American Republic. Today, there are between 150 and 200 states globally which call themselves republics, including China and North Korea, but no one takes this seriously. That would be a story in itself. I'll address it at the end. But boy, people took the word republic or republican seriously before World War I. Now, you have to begin with Augustine. In the City of God, books 1 to 5, he continually circles around the original Roman Republic. that is before the Civil Wars and before the Empire. And in book 5, he tries to answer the issue in this way, but it's very tricky. Was the Roman Empire awarded by providence? His answer is yes. But here's the tricky part. Because the Republic for 250 years was so good that God awarded the empire as a gift. Now, I know that sounds paradoxical, but the reason why is that Rome, the early Republican Rome, according to Cicero and other sources, exhibited many virtues. Civic virtues, military virtues, even religious virtues, although not charity. Because the Republic for 200 years did not worship idols. That's a story in itself. And the Republic got just what it deserved, as Virgil contended, recognition and global rule of the world, or the known world at that point. And Augustine insisted that although history is marked by great empires, especially if you read the Bible, the Republican form of government is the best. It's not the easiest, it's not the most stable, but it has the best natural form. And here's a down and dirty explanation of what he means by a form. Common good, bonum commune, can have two interrelated meanings. We can say that a people have a bonum commune with regard to their end, such as the army has the end of winning the battle. But an end is a transitive form. That is, once it's achieved, you go on to the next one. You go on to the next one. But the form of common action is intransitive. That is, it's the excellence of doing it together. And this is why small republics probably have an easier chance to have this intransitive good highlighted. So something like a sports team or a club in which the thing that's most enjoyable is not the transitive end, it's the intransitive communion. And he attributes that to the early republic on the authority of Cicero and other ancient Roman writers. Now, speaking of another Augustine, I have to credit Father Augustine Thompson, because when I read his book, The Cities of God, on the medieval communes, such as Perugia, where Leo XIII was archbishop in the 19th century, Assisi was a commune or a republic. He shows in this book that they're stubborn and warlike and don't cotton easily to other ecclesiastical authorities coming in and telling them what to do with their religious devotions, telling them what to do with their calendars. And Republican government has always had this trait, and it continues maybe to the end of World War II or at the end of the 1940s. They don't like outside interference. It's one of the reasons they're suspicious of empires. So in Leo's time, born in 1810, dubiously was there a French Republic in 1810, because by 1810, Napoleon ran the state as an imperial operation. Liberty, equality, and fraternity were still used as emblems, but it had degenerated into an empire. The French will be unable to reconstitute a stable republic until 1870. But we also have the example of the Swiss Republic which, much like those medieval communes and the French Republic of 1789, are vehemently anti-clerical. That is, they don't like outside interference or even advice on religious matters. Think too, much later, the Mexican Republic of 1925, anti-clerical to the bone, persecutorial. They much exceeded the French even in persecution of clerical authorities. Now, to come back to Leo's time, he understood. He understood by the time he is a top-ranking cleric that there are two, what I'm going to call overwhelming republics that are powerful, somewhat stable, and are going to make life difficult, or they're going to pose questions about clerical authority. And that is France, as it's reconstituted as a republic in 1870, and of course, the much older American Republic. He was especially concerned about the French Third Republic, because the French Third Republic since 1801 had been under a concordat with the Pope. Pius VII, in captivity, made a deal with Napoleon, this concordat. And although there had been 4 or 5 regime changes up to this now Third Republic, the concordat had not been repudiated. And he was especially worried that the Third Republic would cancel that concordat and threaten Catholic schools, which were already being closed down, but most of all, would overturn the law of marriage, because Napoleon's code did not give legal birth to no-fault divorce. And Leo was sure that they were about to do it, and he was very nervous and wanted to treat the French Republic carefully, besides the fact that it's the daughter of the church and so on and so forth. So, and of course, the pontifical states were given to the papacy by Pepin. There was a long history. So let me get to the first document, having to do with the French. Published in 1892, a year after Rerum Novarum, au milieu. He's trying to calm down Catholic resistance to the Republic and calling upon the Catholic Church there and the Catholics in France to rally to the Republic, lest that concordat get canceled and all kinds of dominoes fall. And I'm going to quote some lines from it. Various political governments have succeeded one another in France during the last century. No kidding. Each having its own distinctive form, the empire, the monarchy, and the republic. By giving oneself up to abstractions, one could at length conclude which is the best of these forms, considered in themselves, and in all truth, it may be affirmed that each of them is good, provided it leads straight to its end, that is, the common good, for which social authority is constituted. And finally, it may be added that from a relative point of view, such and such a form of government may be preferable, being better adapted to the character and customs of such and such a nation. He continues. And this was the part that raised the controversy. However, it must be carefully observed that whatever be the form of civil power in a nation, it cannot be considered so definitive as to have the right to remain immutable, even though such were the intentions of those who in the beginning determined them. Only the Church of Jesus Christ has been able to preserve, and surely will preserve unto the consummation of time, her form of government. And far from wishing to transform her essential constitution, she has the power even to relinquish conditions of true liberty and sovereign independence with which Providence has endowed her in the general interest of souls. But in regard to purely human societies, it is an often repeated historical fact that time, that great transformer of all things here below, operates great changes in the political institutions. On some occasions, it limits itself to modify something of the form of the established government, or again, it will go so far as to substitute other forms for the primitive ones, forms totally different, even as regards the mode of transmitting sovereign power. Unquote. By the way, this did not go over well among many French Catholics, certainly the more traditional Catholics. But in that very year, he did a magazine interview with Henri Laurent, a prominent French sociologist, and one of the editors of the Petit Journal. And here's the thing that really got Leo on the hot seat with France, the French Catholics. Quote, "My wish for you is that you shall no longer be weakened by barren quarrels. I'm of the opinion that all citizens should meet in the legal domain. Each can keep opinion of his inward preferences, but in the domain of action, there is no other government than that which France has chosen for herself, namely the Third Republic. The Republic is as legitimate a form of government as others." And now here's what's really going to get under the craw of many Frenchmen. He continues, "The United States, which are a republic, in spite of the disadvantages that result from unbridled liberty, grow greater day by day, and the Catholic Church there has developed without any strife with the state. These two powers agree very well, as they should agree everywhere, on the condition that one does not trespass on the rights of the other. Liberty is really the basis, the foundation of relations between the civil authority and the religious conscience. The Church claims liberty before all else, and what suits the United States has still more reason to suit Republican France." Unquote. So, how can Catholic be at once under two diverse social political forms? That of the Church, and by the way, a church that had been somewhat reconstituted in 1870 at the First Vatican Council. It was no longer a church of papal states, for one thing. Actually, Pepin is out of the picture at that point. Now, there's one little note on this before I go to the questions that begin to open up, is that Republican France, the Third Republic, was very clever in handling this issue as time went on, because they allowed very traditional French Catholicism to be implanted and to have significant freedom in the colonies. So what was not being permitted in France with certain Catholic liberties and rituals and so forth were actually empowered and promoted in the French colonies in Africa, the Pacific, and Asia. because the Third Republic thought, since we're dealing with primitives abroad, a bit of primitive religion will probably do some help. Okay. Now, in this kind of debate, the American Catholics had several advantages compared to the French. And let me just list them without long discussion. First, for decades, Rome did not pay the same attention to the USA as it did to France. Well, there are hardly any Catholics. I think in 1785, there were 17,000 Catholics served by 25 priests. Okay, this is not a big ecclesiological issue. But after the Civil War, the Catholic population is doubling every 10 years. And it's about that time that Rome begins to notice that there's also a Republican issue with regard to the United States. Catholics in the United States had another advantage. Federal law did not cover marriage, education, or religion. There was no established church, not nationally, and there hadn't even been state establishments for some time. So there was never a concordat. Those kind of things were not at issue that American Catholic prelates had to work through. Third, American hierarchy by post-Civil War times had no vested interest in the political forms of the old regime, because they had no old regime except for Britain, which was a long time before that. Fourth, the Catholic hierarchy, if they had quarrels, tended to be given about how much missionary effort and how many Catholic dollars should be sent to the populated cities and huge archdioceses on the eastern seaboard and in the Great Lakes versus Western expansion. Western expansion becomes a huge issue around this time. Hey, hats off to the West Coast Dominicans. Yeah, they went from all the borderlands to the West. By the way, one reason Catholic University was not put in Philadelphia, New York, or Boston, but rather in a no-account town called Washington, D.C., where no one wanted to live anyway, was because they didn't want to put it in one of the three big ones on the East Coast or in Chicago, lest it invite more ecclesiastical quarrels. There was a quarrel by the time of Leo, during Leo's time, over the labor issue. In fact, the USA Catholics were out in front on this. The big issue was called the Knights of Labor. But this didn't count as a barrier to Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum at all. It kind of fit with it. And finally, they had the advantage of 3 councils at Baltimore. And it was, those 3 councils were given to missions and education. We get the Baltimore Catechism from the 3rd Baltimore Council, 1884. So there was plenty of consensus. Now, I give a last advantage. Archbishop Ireland, who was the prelate of what we now call the Twin Cities, and Cardinal Gibbons of Baltimore, and Jean-Baptiste Lamy, that comes from the Archbishop, Santa Fe, we're all sort of on the same page about the desirability of Western expansion and setting up a missions, then schools with catechisms, so on and so forth. And this is key. Archbishop Ireland was educated in France. He spoke French fluently. And Cardinal Gibbons was completely proficient in Italian. They were actually able to talk with Papa Leo, and they went over several times. Little things like this can make a big difference, and Leo listened to them. And maybe Leo shouldn't have made the United States a model for the French to copy. That leads to, with Republican governments, that's an insult. Republican governments want to be praised, but there was a ongoing and important connection between American prelates and Leo. Now, an issue did arise a decade after the problems of rallying to the Republic. And it came out of America, although I don't think it was caused by it. And it had to do with the question of whether the active moral virtues are superior to the virtues of contemplation or the contemplative virtues. There was a French translation of the biography of Isaac Hecker that caused a stir in France because the biography, either by virtue of translation or ideology, made the point that American Catholics are just practical. And there's hardly any monasteries there. Now, of course, that's true, in part because the contemplative orders, when they came to the United States, beginning in the early 19th century, by and large, were not allowed to be contemplative or not fully contemplative. They were put into the role of being school teachers. And that went from coast to coast with only a few exceptions. The Trappists were an exception in Kentucky. So now Leo had to do something because the controversy in France about American practical reasoners and practical agents being superior to monasteries in the contemplative virtues had caused a big controversy. And he had already handed something to the Americans. He praised the Republican form of government that doesn't cause problems for the church. Now he had to say something about this controversy. He made it very clear that he was not criticizing the American government, that he was not criticizing American social customs or anything like that. He was criticizing this opinion that the active virtues are superior, maybe even far superior to the contemplative virtues. And this is what he wrote. The underlying principle of these new questions is that in order to more easily attract those who differ from her, the church should shape her teachings more in accord with the spirit of the age and relax some of her ancient severity and make concessions to new opinions. Many think that these concessions should be made not only with regard to ways of living, but even in regard to doctrines, which belong to the deposit of the faith. But in regard to ways of living, he continues, she has been accustomed to so yield that the divine principle of morals being kept intact, she has never neglected to accommodate herself to the character and genius of the nations which she embraces. The overesteem of natural virtue finds a method of expression in assuming to divide all virtues into active and passive. Now he shifted the argument to a theoretical question, how you denominate active and passive. And it is alleged that whereas passive virtues found better place in past times, our age is to be characterized by the active. For the foregoing, it is manifest, he's writing to Cardinal Gibbons, that we are not able to give approval to those views which in their collective sense are called by some Americanism. Now, actually, this was the end of the controversy. It ended there for many different reasons. First of all, the Third Republic had not canceled the Concordat, but everyone knew that they were about to cancel the Concordat. So that old 1801 meeting of the minds between Napoleon and Pius VII, Leo knew it was about to go. Now, the French, for their part, were gentlemanly enough not to cancel the Concordat until a year after Leo died. But people knew it was coming. Number two, this was only a few years before World War I. And once we have World War I, followed by the Great Depression, followed by the totalitarian ideologies and governments, people forgot about Americanism. But there was a consequence of this transition. The consequence of the transition was that teaching on regimes faded. It really, all you have to do is start reading in the 1920s with Pius XI. Regime theory or regime analysis fades and fades and fades. I mean, he's already under a fascist government in Rome. Well, you have to be careful. Only by about 1948, after World War II, does this calm down. And so the emphasis post-World War II, you can say even into our own time, although our own time is not nearly as successful as the 1950s into the 60s, the emphasis was on cooperation. And not what government is inside of another government or who's under concordat. It's more like Pacem in Terris. It's on development. It's on world peace. And we now have the United Nations. And again, the issue being that almost every government on earth claims to be a republic. And how do you start sorting all of that out? And so, and Populorum Progressio. It's on development. And it's on Northern Hemisphere helping Southern Hemisphere economically and in various ways. That's why when I was a young man at the University of Notre Dame, at the Kiss of Peace, people would turn to each other and say, "May the development be with you." And church movements became something like NGOs. And even governments became something like NGOs. It became quite fluid. So in retrospect, we understand the Catholic social teaching leading up now to Leo XIV has different patterns to it. It's not nearly as philosophical. It is not pointed. It doesn't try to resolve things philosophically, by and large. It doesn't worry very much about concordats, although they're still made, but nothing like the 1920s. I'm almost done. Cardinal Bertone, I was in a room with him once in which he complained that everyone tells him he can't say the word government. He can only use the term gouvernance. Something like an international meeting. Gouvernance. The role of government is just to assist economy, movements, and so on and so forth. But then we ran into a trouble. that I think John Paul II, his shift of social doctrine to the anthropological problem, by the way, that's never total incomplete, but that becomes a major theme, is because gouvernance and all those human rights treaties slackened on questions of truth regarding the main object of government or of gouvernance, and that is the truth about the human person. And so, he did spend the last 10 or 12 years of his pontificate, JP2, on that anthropological problem. And it begins to kind of look like Leo again, because he's actually making philosophical and theological arguments. And by the way, the issue of marriage never goes away. That remains put, although it tends to be rooted today in international discourse more in the rights of the human person. So what I expect from Leo XIV is that he knows he's inherited a different world than what Leo XIII was living in. Maybe some similar things on the labor problem. And he has this fantastic background, Chicago, Philadelphia, Peru, Rome. And I expect him to continue what I'm going to call a weak regime analysis and a strong anthropological foundation, both philosophical and theological, for most social problems. And that's why I wanted to give you at least this 35-minute talk on the tale of the regimes, because we live in a very weak period of regime analysis. And, no one even wants to define what Republican means. Not the political party, but the form of government. And I have no fears or deep apprehensions about Leo XIV being able to do this. He has plenty of experience, and it won't all be development. It will still have a strong anthropological character. And on that, I've talked long enough. Thanks.
Thank you, Russ, for that wonderful talk. We have some time for questions from the audience. We have Andrew here with the mic. He can come to you to ask the question. Russ, you might not see the question asker if the camera doesn't see them, but you will hear them, and we'd invite your insights.
If you can put your face close to the microphone so that Professor Hittinger can hear, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Doctor. So you spoke about how Leo said each regime could have its legitimacy, but even if you think about the coming of the Third Republic, it was because of the disaster of the Franco-Prussian War. Like, it seems that disaster always comes before regime change. So how could there be legitimate regime change without some kind of evil that comes about the nation?
Right, good question. And it sounds correct to me, because even the American colonists, having over 150 years de facto experience with something like Republican government in their colonies, it took the disaster of the war, that they were going to be suppressed by the Navy and the Army of the King. It will take disasters. It usually does. And the other one, of course, that I mentioned was World War II. It really changed the game. And maybe today it will be economic, a new depression. I have no idea. I can't tell. But I think your point is well taken. To just slide out of a regime philosophically into another one sounds pretty weird. And the Romans didn't do it that way. The Romans slid from their older republic into empire because of that ongoing set of wars with Carthage. In the acquisition of incredible wealth and power, it began to slide. Yeah, the Carthaginian Wars kind of ended the republic. But so you're right.
This is Father Ansam. I don't know if you can see me, but so thank you for your talk. That was very interesting. I have a follow-up on this question of Americanism and these active virtues that Pope Leo XIII addressed. It seems that in the 20th century, what you said about the development and these kind of things, it is an emphasis on activism almost, and maybe the turn towards anthropological truth is sort of a contemplative look at how things are rather than what to do. But I think the story still continues. So under the last pontificate, there were many voices that seem to say that contemplative religious life, for example, is outdated, and that religious have to legitimate themselves by active apostolates and showing that they're socially useful, perhaps. Do you have any insights on where that is at, or whether there are any kind of movements and developments?
Well, that is, what you say is true. And by the way, the last pontificate was an American pontificate. It was just in the Southern Hemisphere. So this old understanding of the New World, at least in the Americas, being more active and adopting more readily Republican government has some truth to it. And yes, so you are right. And I also point out in support of your comments that the Nouvelle Theologie didn't come from the Americas. It came from countries that had some continuity with the contemplative tradition. I mean, well, France and Germany, and even Italy. There was continuity there for not reducing philosophy and theology simply to be a practical fix of something, but to suffer through the effort that it takes to figure out whether you can make sense of certain issues philosophically and theologically. So I agree. I don't think Nouvelle Theologie, I stand to be corrected, even gets to very far into the United States until 25 years after it's on the continent. So I understand that question. And the school issue that defined the genius of the American church post-Civil War by the way, I'm so prayerfully thankful that when I went to Catholic school, grammar school, in the 1950s, I had French sisters rather than Irish sisters. Believe me, you want the French nuns. They were more gentle and more intellectual. So yes, this continues to be an issue. And there are some changes going on today for wanting Catholic schools to be more contemplative, at least in the sense of having something other than an agenda of being a top-rate engineer in a Silicon Valley company. Something more than that. So, yeah, they're going to have to be rebuilt little bit by little bit. But in the old system that I grew up in, I have to say, you went to parish schools who had French and German, Portuguese nuns who were all in flight from the regimes over there that came over to the United States, probably late 19th century. You were exposed to another kind of culture, and it was deeply embedded in the parish. So here's another social institution, and parents. And parents. You couldn't hide from authority in that system. And it was not always brutal authority, unless you went to study with the Irish Christian Brothers or something, and then it was brutal.
Hello, Dr. Hittinger. I don't know if you can see me, Father Peter Hanna here, who's seen you on many previous occasions. Thank you for your talk. I wanted to clarify a point you made at the very beginning of your talk, where you commented that Augustine, I think you said City of God, I can't recall, follows Cicero in saying that the republican form of government is superior to the empire. I'm wondering, is that a theoretical claim that Augustine makes in principle, or is that more based in the specific way that was embodied in Rome,
Yeah.
that the republic in Rome as practiced was clearly superior to the empire as practiced there? It just, and the reason I ask, obviously, you're the scholar, I haven't read City of God in quite some time, but it seems to me counterintuitive that Augustine, who emphasizes so much the passingness of all human things, would make a theoretical claim about government like that so strongly.
Right. I understand the question, and it's a good question, because Augustine's very tricky on this. He raises the issue 3 times in the City of God. First, in Book 1, where he compares Marcus who died because he took an oath to God to return to Carthage for diplomatic purposes and suffered death. Marcus Regulus. And he compares Marcus Regulus to Job. At some, at least natural level, to understand that the divine is superior, even to Rome. Okay. Then in Book 5, he raises the issue because in Book 5, he treats about halfway through it whether the empire was given to the Romans by God, or whether it was in divine providence that they rule so many other nations and so on and so forth. His answer to that is yes, but. You got to say, but trouble. Because they became morally lazy and they became too rich. And they were, rather than being good Republicans, it was libido dominandi nonstop. Then he treats it again in Book 19. And you get somewhat ambiguous answers throughout Book 19 on this. But I don't think he ever abandons the notion to which he was exposed when he was but a grammar school child because of Roman literature and training, that there was something superior about Roman order that was not just its military victories, not just the transitive common good, but the intransitive common good. The virtues that they did have, I don't think he ever drops that entirely. And but why should he? He was weaned on that tradition. Oh, he was weaned on a memory of that tradition, to be sure. That's why scholars have so many problems teaching students what he thought of republics, because he treats them 3 times and all three times in different places of the city of God. And his answers aren't knocked down conclusive. So yeah, you've got to really work with Augustine on this. And I wouldn't say more than what I already said, except if we had a chance just to go through the text and see how he handles them.
Hey, bro. So I had a more of a simple question rather than like a ideological one. I was wondering if you could clarify or inform my imagination what you mean by the primitive traditions that the Third Republic wasn't in favor of for the, I guess, France proper, but was okay with being in the primitive colonies.
Wait a minute now. What was the context in which I used the word primitive?
You're talking about the Third Republic was clever in handling certain issues.
Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. Now I know what you're asking. Yes, because remember, most of these European nations by 1870 were colonial. In Africa, Asia, the Pacific, they're colonial. And so they have to have, in a way, two regimes. They have to have their domestic regime, whatever it might be. Maybe it's Republican, maybe it's not Republican. And they need their colonial regime. And part of the, how to put it, the munus or the mission of the colonial regime is to teach people they regarded as primitives. How to put it? Religion. Now, it could be just very practical religion, but such religion as leads to more what they called moral, social, and economic development. I think the French, the English, the Dutch, the Germans, they're all doing this. Okay, so this is the tragedy of Vietnam, by the way. The tragedy of Vietnam. And so at some point, you don't give your, the people who are subjected to your colonists and this inferior status of just needing to hear, to go to Sunday school. There's something more involved in this, is to learn the arts and the sciences that are necessary for being part of a larger scheme of things, okay? And, you know, economics became the real issue because European wealth into the 19th century was in large part extracted wealth because the raw materials were coming from all over the world. And they were taken by train to ports, and ports took them to England, and England took them to Germany. No, so, and of course, that's why there was such a vociferous reaction after World War II. Leading into the 50s, there had to be some other model. And the problem was the development model. Popolorum Progressio, as innocent as it was in the mind of Paul VI, as innocent as it was, fell right into the trap of telling people that they needed help and that, they needed multi-pronged corporations, multinational corporations, first world banks. You know, that is the immediate trigger to liberation theology. Is exactly the resistance to that notion. So yeah, the world's still a complicated place going into the 50s and the 60s.
Dr. Hittinger, great hearing from you again. This is Brother Philip Neri. Oh, okay. They asked me to move. Okay, over here. Okay, good. Okay. So you mentioned this original anthropological emphasis from Leo XIII, a drift more toward the development questions in the 20th century, and then John Paul II trying to reclaim some of that anthropological turn toward the turn of this century. And it is striking when you read Leo XIII, especially, he was very personally immersed in the social scientists and philosophers of his own time. Like it's fascinating reading about the stuff that he personally was able to study because he had that sort of contemplative space even while being Pope. How possible is that in the modern papacy? Because it seems like the Popular Progressio coincides historically with a very active turn in the papacy itself. There's a lot more international travel. There's a lot more working with the NGOs and governments themselves. So how much is the sort of intellectual apparatus around the papal office really set up to address those questions on an anthropological level when so much of it seems sort of fundamentally oriented toward these issues of development?
Yeah, good question. By the way, John Paul II had an advantage. He was Polish. And how many times during his pontificate did he wag his finger at the developed world for abandoning Poland that had a republic, for heaven's sakes, to the communists? Malta, he's always raising these kinds of questions, that Poland was left childless. And then he had plenty of writings also on how more fundamental social culture in Poland kept them fairly well oriented. Now, with regard to the third world, because Poland was abandoned to the second world, the communist world, but in the third world, this is a very important issue. And by the way, if I knew more about Leo XIV, I would say more. But having spent all those years in Peru, he must understand this issue. That to work in Peru is not the same thing as to have a debate, as Roniger did with the Germans, about fundamental moral ontology. I mean, he must understand that these are not exactly the same thing. And of course, both must be sustained. That's the best crack I can make on that. Yeah. Leo XIV may be of some help on this. Best I can do on short notice.
No, this is just a comment. You can respond or not, but I wanted to go back to the regime question. And I think it's such a fascinating issue because, of course, when you're doing political philosophy, I mean, the classical question, the most fundamental question of political philosophy is, what's the best regime? Whatever you think of Leo Strauss, he's certainly correct when he stresses that point. And so you see this in Plato, it's in Aristotle. So whenever you're doing, let's say, properly speaking, political philosophy, the main question you're always coming back to is, what's the best regime? Aristotle has 4 senses of best in the beginning of book 4. There's the best absolutely speaking, there's the best given already a sort of a polity or at least a culture up and running, there's the best given certain starting points, and then he says there's the best just to keep order. But you can see his mind is really, really working on this understanding what's the best regime. Cicero is the same way, right? And of course Cicero and Aristotle ultimately give some kind of, they have very different understandings of what a mixed regime is, but they both come to some kind of argument. Aristotle will say ultimately in some sense monarchy is the best, absolutely speaking, but the best that you can usually do. Okay, so anyway, the point is that's the main question of political philosophy. But I think when you introduce the supernatural dimension, so when you're talking about the city of God, and now you have grace building upon nature, the central question of, let's say, Catholic social thought, broadly speaking, really isn't the best regime anymore. It's the best relationship between the church and the state, however the state organizes itself in with some kind of justice. That doesn't denigrate the question of the best regime, but it shows you theologically now, you've been brought up into a higher register. And so the philosophical question remains, but now the emphasis is, okay, however you organize yourself in terms of justice, in terms of some kind of decent order to a common good, now we've got a higher question. How is your polity going to relate itself to a supernatural society, and how are we going to relate ourselves to you? And just as a kind of, I'm teaching the City of God right now, so I happen to have some notes in my bag. So here's a quote from Book 19 that I think illustrates the shift in emphasis when you introduce the properly revealed theological reflection. Here's Augustine in Book 19, quote, "For as long as this heavenly city is a pilgrim on earth, she summons citizens of all nations and every tongue, and brings together a society of pilgrims in which no attention is paid to any difference in customs, laws, and institutions by which earthly peace is achieved or maintained. She does not rescind or destroy these things. She preserves and follows them, provided only that they do not impede the religion by which we are taught that the one supreme and true God is to be worshipped." So I think that quote from Book 19 in Augustine's City of God kind of shows the emphasis is different now. We're still going to talk about the best regime, but we've got our main focus is now a little bit higher.
Yes. Well, you're right. You're right. And that's, and Augustine is right. But the point I want to make in favor of regime analysis is this. Even second best regimes are pitiful unless they understand the intransitive common good. So today, most people who use the term common good, however well-intentioned and whatever language they speak, or what continent they're on, mean the transitive common good. That is what's brought about extrinsically by some kind of cooperation, like development or whatever. And if you don't have a somewhat vigorous sense of the non-transitive common good, that is the unity that's enjoyed between the citizens or the members of the corporation or the sports team or whatever, when that is de-emphasized so much, we've really got a problem. And that's the problem that I'm most interested in tackling. Because to me, it's obvious that that's what's going on. Common good means extrinsic. It means winning the battle, solving the problem of inflation, solving the problem of distribution of goods, solving the people of parking in the wrong place in the condo parking lot. That's what people mean by it. And that's not what Aristotle meant by it. And that's not what Augustine meant by it. Certainly not what Aquinas meant by it. But how to fix that, since it's so common, so to speak, to only emphasize the transitive common good, that, it's above my pay grade, except to be a teacher.
Is Father Dennis, and I'm curious to go back to the question about, if we go back to the question for a moment about Americanism, and the church's role in trying to draw us back into as you say, a non-transitive good, of contemplation in that sense. And have we lost that in the subsequent, lost the battle against Americanism in the subsequent kind of history of what's happened within the Curia and its focus on development, and the American church itself and its kind of focus on, even as Dominicans, where we all got into very active apostolates and parishes and things. And how would you counsel Pope Leo to kind of retake the question, given where we are now?
Great question, because in some sectors of life, American life, we do understand that what could be called communion is a non-transitive common good. We don't turn into the other person, but otherwise it would be a transitive good. But We understand like the spirit of a sports team. We can understand these things, but publicly, we don't think of institutions that way. And I don't know how we would even begin to think about institutions that way, because you've raised, I guess, the nub of the practical issue that common good means, how to put it, distribution of things. And it doesn't mean the brotherhood. You know, you go into any Italian restaurant, even in the United States, certainly in Rome, they will always have that plaque in the dining room saying how great it is to be brothers. You know, that there's something more than just work and harvesting crops and things like that. And it gets to the root of the mystery of the intellect, because the human intellect is capable of being one with things without derogation of either. So when there's a loss of the issue of the intellect, and it creeps into other things, how distinct things can be one without destruction. And I do see that going on, just generally speaking. And so I don't know how to correct that, but more philosophy. I mean, you know, Wojtyła was great on this stuff. Read his essays he wrote before he became Pope that are now included in the critical edition of The Acting Person. 2 of them are on subject and community, in which he kind of carefully traces this question. How I can be have my own subjectivity and have a shared subjectivity with others that has real external consequences too. I mean, you become friends and you can be a nation. What's the mystery of that? And it's at least half Thomistic. It's a great issue. Actually, I tell people to read those essays. Actually, for Wojtyła, they were pretty clearly written.
Hello, Dr. Hittinger. This is Brother Anselm Dominic. Thank you for your talk. I have a question about, this issue of regime change and how that has changed over time. It seems to me that maybe some of the weak regime criticism or analysis that you're talking about, it's shifted from maybe, forms of political government to economic regimes. That still remains in a lot of what the popes write and talk about, although it's kind of frustratingly vague sometimes. But I wonder what you think about maybe as the kind of world power of communism has gone down, there is a kind of shift toward a criticism of capitalism in the West, but in vague terms, as I said. I wonder whether that has a valence of promoting this kind of intransitive common good. Economics is, as you said, it can be, in its lowest form, it can be about just how goods are distributed, but I think it also has a valence of, human relationships. How are people, I think especially maybe John Paul II had that in mind when he wrote about these issues. But I wonder what you think about how that kind of criticism, what role that plays in the world today, whether there's a particular need for it, and what you think Leo XIV might have to say about that.
Well, not only Wojtyła, but Dorothy Day. There are plenty of antecedents for this in modern times, in which Catholics have understood rather clearly that the transitive and the distributive has to also kind of mesh with the intransitive. I think this has been an insight for a long time. And by the way, I even think it's in Rerum Novarum. Because remember, the last section of Rerum Novarum is defending actually the political and legal rights of what we used to call arbitrary societies. That term probably doesn't work today, but voluntary society, completely voluntary societies, that they are to be protected by the state because they are true societies. They're not the three necessary societies, but they are true societies. They have that intransitive common good, right? I'd go so far to say even motorcycle clubs have these things. And so this is not a mystery. People have been talking about this for some time. Whether or not, John Dennison knows more about this than I could even hope to understand, how in the corporate world, in the economic world, and in the missionary world, these things are being developed and understood today. I'd like to know, but it's crucial. Just to dump development on people without friendship, something more than a cup of coffee, is absolutely crucial. And, that was a problem with EU. Because when it was formed, it was more Catholic, and it understood to be a community of communities. Then it became almost totally economic, right? And so one country producing the cars and getting extraordinarily rich does not understand that somewhere in the southern part of the Mediterranean, people are paying too much and all of the money is going to them. Like, what kind of community is it when that happens? So these things are understandable. Fixable is another thing.
I think we'll end the Q&A there. We're actually right on time for lunch. Lunches will be served at the back tables in the room. You have the opportunity to spread out. It's a nice day. The sun is shining mostly, so you're welcome to go outside into the courtyard as well. But let's give another round of applause to Dr. Hittinger.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we start this panel, I just kind of want to introduce it by thanking Father Michael Sweeney, who's really the Fellows is really his brainchild. And one of the wonderful things about the Fellows is that we have this very rich dialogue going on with the DSPT and with the brothers here, both the student brothers and the priests who are on the faculty. And so this panel is Father Sweeney. I'm thanking you as you walk in. So this kind of engagement between the Fellows and the DSPT is one of the greatest and I think most fruitful aspects of the whole situation. So thank you, Father Sweeney. Let me introduce the three respondents to Russ's talk, and I'm just going to go from my left to my right here, and then they'll also go in this. They'll present in the same order. Patrick Brennan teaches at the law school in Villanova, where he holds the John F. Scarpa Chair in Catholic Legal Studies. He served as Associate Dean. He has published 5 books. I'm not going to name all of them. He has also published more than 80 articles, essays, and book chapters, many of them appearing in really, really top-ranked journals of law and political philosophy. He has been a member of the Fellows, am I right, since 2014? You received your honorary doctorate from the DSPT, so he's been a member of the College of Fellows for over 10 years. By any measure, one of the leading scholars of law that we have in Catholic social teaching, so very, very happy to have him on the panel here. After Patrick, we'll have Father Brad Elliott, who earned an MA in Jazz and Studio Music from the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory in 2002, an STL from the Dominican House of Studies, Licentiate in Sacred Theology, recently earned his doctorate in Sacred Theology from Catholic University of America, where he wrote a dissertation on private property. He's become a student and a friend of Russ's as well, so very happy to have him on the panel. And last and tallest, we have Father Raphael Mary Salcillo, who's been a friend of mine for a while now, so I can needle him a bit. Has an undergrad degree in physics from Caltech, an MS and a master's in electrical engineering, University of California in San Diego, an MA in philosophy. He turned more to the contemplative after that. MA in philosophy from here at the DSPT, and MDiv also from the DSPT, and earned his doctorate in philosophy at the University of Notre Dame. I know his original academic position was at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, and I have a lot of friends who taught there, and I know they were heartbroken to lose him. So he's done great work all along the way. So with that, take it away, Patrick. Oh, and I can also say, too, just so Russ can hear, you got to, unfortunately, kind of hold the mic close.
Thank you very much, and I also want to thank Dr. Russell Hittinger for his amazing presentation. It's an honor to be here. It was an honor to be invited to say a few words. It's very, very difficult to respond to somebody like Dr. Hittinger. His presentation was so already exhaustively insightful. So it's, I would like to just offer a few reflections, perhaps some occasion for questions, but perhaps something more practical. Is that going on and off? How's this? Okay, thank you. All right. But some more questions of reflection of what is actually at stake in the social question. What did the popes of Catholic social teaching, particularly Leo XIII, see was actually at stake on a very deep level? And I would like to offer these reflections by focusing on three distinct yet related concepts. First, the concept, the common good, the concept of human friendship, and then the concept of authority. Now, I would insist that these concepts are certainly distinct, but they are so intimately related that what's actually at stake is not simply a misunderstanding or a loss of one, but if we simply lose one of these, we lose them all. We lose them all in a way which is severely detrimental to society in very dangerous ways. We are by nature political animals. And one of the greatest handicaps of the modern world is the violence that's been done to the word political. I talk about this with my students all the time. I give a story to my students, I might as well say it again, with regards to this violence done to the word political. A few years ago, at the very beginning of the COVID lockdowns, I was calling parishioners that I knew were by themselves, stuck in their homes. And I remember talking on the phone to one parishioner who said to me, "Oh, thanks, Father Brad, thank you for the call. It's been lonely. I've been stuck in my house. But, you know, over the last few weeks being alone, I've gotten really political." That's what she said. She said, "I've gotten really political." And I had to scratch my head. I was like, "Can you say that again?" She said, "Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm just by myself, but I've gotten really political." And so I was like, can you describe for me what you mean by getting political? She says, "Well, I mean, I'm just stuck in my home, but I've been binging CNN for like 8 hours a day." I was like, "Oh, okay." So that's what we mean by political. So yelling at pixels on a screen is what has become the very concept of the human person as a political animal. And what's actually at stake here? The human person as a zoon politikon, or a political animal, a social creature, is such because the human person, each and every one of us here, we are the type of creatures that must come to our perfection within society. We come to our perfection because we are capable of a type of love that transcends the love of our own particular good. It's a type of love the classical thinkers would have called the love of friendship. We're capable of a love of friendship, which is a love of a shared good. A good that is loved precisely because it is shared. And because it is good, because it is shareable, it is the cause of a commonality. It is the cause of society, the common good, a type of good which we are capable of loving, a good that transcends our own individuality, a good that we do not possess as individuals, but we can only have it, possess it, by entering into it with others. The very genesis of society. By nature, we are social. And what does that mean? We are social by nature and not social by coercion. We are social by nature and not merely social by consent. And what's the distinction here? The opposite of this idea of the human person as social by nature would be the very common notion of the individual in the state of nature. That the human person enters into the world in some kind of state of nature, discovers this innate dignity he has, pre-social dignity, and then enters into society as a hedge against the other who is a threat to this dignity. Now, this is a very dangerous idea.
Yeah, I know.
On this idea, my rights are nothing other than a hedge against the other. Even something like a property right would be my hedge against the totalitarian state. Now, as much as something like a property right would fulfill this freedom-defending function, simply a hedge against the other can never be the deepest source of a right, can never be the deepest source of the sacred and inviolable character of any human right. What does this do to the very concept of authority? In such a system, the concept of authority collapses into a mere instrument of power. Authority collapses into power. Authority itself, classically, is an expression of the natural, goal-directed goodness of the whole of order of which I am a part, which is society. It is an expression of that teleological higher good into which I enter into and in which I receive my highest perfection. Authority emerges because I achieve my highest dignity in a shared good that transcends my own individuality. This is also authority has its fundamental root in that friendship, which is at the heart of society. A loss of this understanding of the common good and friendship means that authority is an instrument of power to protect me from you. Society becomes a network of competing power structures, like what you were talking about. Just authority becomes power checking power. All social hierarchy becomes not a teleological expression of my highest perfection in society, but rather all social structures become instruments of oppression. Instruments of oppression. At the root of society, then, at the root of society is not friendship, but at the root of society is merely competing power structures. This is the root and heart of almost all critical theory. This idea that at the root, at the fundamental root of society, pulling back all the layers of the onion, at its core, there are simply competing power structures. And then the role of the moralist would simply be to discover these power structures and deconstruct them. Deconstruct them. So, for reflection, I offer that this is what is actually at stake in the social question. The human person as a political animal, reaching his highest perfection in that type of love of friendship that generates a type of society or common good. And at the core, is an attack on and a collapse of the very concept of authority. The use of authority as an instrument of power, and then theologically, ultimately, an attack on the fatherhood of God. At the root of all attacks on authority is an attack on the fatherhood of God.
Yeah.
This is what's at stake in the social question, and I would insist that this was at stake in the minds of the popes that inaugurated this tradition of Catholic social teaching. So thank you.
My napkin here. So I feel like the old Sesame Street song. What one of these things is not like the other. I don't know if I remember that song, but I'm a philosopher. I'm not a political philosopher. I don't know a lot about a lot of the stuff that Russ studies. I've really appreciated, Russ, your talk. Enjoyed it thoroughly. My response, I guess, is going to pick up on something that I do know and believe very strongly in, Russ, that you emphasized at one point, which is the importance of our understanding of the human person. When I was at University of St. Thomas in Houston, I was there for 4 years after I got my PhD in philosophy. I was privileged to be a part of the restructuring of the core curriculum at the university. And when you hear that about a Catholic university, you usually think, okay, it's an excuse to cut the philosophy and theology, right? Make it more secular. What was cool is that this was the opposite of that. That the goal was to make the core curriculum more focused on the mission. And before the reform, we already had 7 philosophy and theology classes in the core. After the curriculum, the most important thing that happened in that time, I felt like, was that the whole group that I was a part of in redoing this core agreed that the most important class in the core curriculum was the philosophy of the human person. If you get the philosophy of the human person wrong, all sorts of errors are going to follow from that. St. Thomas Aquinas famously begins his De Ante ad Essentia by saying a small error in the beginning is a large error at the end. Sorry, he takes it from Aristotle. Thank you. So the philosophy of the human person is something that people often don't talk about in these sorts of contexts, and I think it's very, very important. Our society kind of operates on a sort of unintelligible mix of materialism and dualism for most of its reasoning. Right?
Undifferentiated notion.
On the one side, the view that only the spiritual matters. It's the thought that counts, right? And on the other side, this idea that the fulfillment of bodily pleasure is the main goal of life. You get a lot of that, including emotional pleasure, and that's what happiness is for a human being. So the philosophy of the human person undergirds all of this, as Rush noted, and it was fun rereading Rerum Novarum and seeing how much of it is behind Leo XIII's reasoning. How much it's grounded in the fundamentality of the family, the relationship of intellect and will, and that's at the basis there. And I don't know about Leo XIV yet, but all the signs that I see are good, honestly, that he understands the human person, and that's not going to be forgotten in his reasonings. Of course, this idea is also not controversial here at DSPT, with the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology. Horribly long name, way too many syllables, but it gets the point across, right? Philosophy and theology are inseparable in our understanding.
Of course.
They must go together. However, in the wider context of the GTU, in which we still reside here, which is ecumenical in its founding, this is not accepted. We're the only school that has philosophy in the GTU. The Buddhist Institute has sometimes philosophy classes, I believe. But essentially, philosophy is our thing in this context. And I think the thing that I want to reflect on is this is a problem in the Protestant tradition as a whole. Philosophy is not seen as important. And in order for us to evangelize the culture we live in, Protestants need to be on the same page as us on that. Now, of course, there's a kind of, they need to be brought into a deeper understanding of the Christian faith. But we agree on so much, and we can work together to evangelize the culture, if only Protestant world, and I'm speaking especially here of the evangelical Protestant world, which is the place where Protestantism is growing, huh? Like it's the place in the world where it's like, where it's still flourishing. Sadly, a lot of the mainline denominations of Protestantism are disappearing. But how can we make common cause with them on this? And this is something that, in our GTU context, I think is important for us to think about. All of us have Protestant friends, right? How do you talk to them about the importance of philosophy? Here's the way it doesn't really work. Try to convince them that as a human being, you're gifted with reason. And so you should study the use of reason, and that's philosophy. You can try that method. They might listen, they might not. But here's another way that I've tried that's worked really well, and that I think is an inroad. Because what we all care about, Catholics and Protestants, is Jesus Christ. Right? We care about Jesus Christ. And the history of Christology teaches the importance of the human person. What is not assumed is not redeemed, the Cappadocians say, right? And try asking an evangelical Protestant, I've done this on several occasions, ask them, hey, did Jesus have a human soul? A lot of times it's a stumper for them. They just hadn't thought through that, right? The Apollinarian heresy, condemned at the First Council of Constantinople, that the Word of God replaced the soul in Christ, right? And he was just a body that was sort of being moved by the Word. For us Catholics, and for those of us at DSPT immersed in the Thomistic tradition, this is just obvious. Of course he had a human soul, right? But our Protestant brethren have not thought through a lot of this, and I think that there's a fruitful line of dialogue to start to think through it together. And I want to make a little recommendation for a book. This is not a profound book, in the sense that it is kind of a profound book, but it's not a deep theological treatise. It's a book called The Cruelty of Heresy by C.F. Allison, bishop, Anglican bishop, C.F. Allison, who was the Anglican bishop of South Carolina. He's very old now. I believe he's still alive. But he wrote this book called The Cruelty of Heresy, in which the thesis of the book, if you can get your Protestant friends to read this, okay, the thesis of the book is errors about the nature of Christ are cruel to the human person. If you treat Christ as being just God that looked like a man, it's going to lead to certain errors about what a human person is and how a human person should live. Likewise, if you adopt Arianism, that Christ was just created, then you're going to have other problems. But I think that there's a fruitful line of dialogue with our Protestant brothers and sisters to help them see that philosophical thought is crucial to understanding, to any kind of deep understanding of our faith, and that this in turn will help them to see through some of the lies of the culture and to speak into them. So That's the little thought that I have for you as a philosopher of the human person. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Well, maybe we should, Russ, maybe I can give you the right of first refusal. Do you want to?
Let
do you want me to open it up to
begin? Let the discussion begin.
Okay, good. So we can just open it up for wider discussion.
I was struck by, was it Federalist 10, the the inevitable, by nature inevitable conflicts, was that what it was? Yeah. And so the state being predicated on that predicament, you know. I think this is contrary to what Father Brad said about us being political animals, and that there's a common good that's truly common, and which means we also should be agreeing on that. And I'm wondering whether the original founding vision is metaphysical in scale, to think that basically the universe is a tragic place because there are inevitable conflicts that can never be resolved. And that has a direct impact on the form of government. Then it must be a government with division of powers, and a government that works with conflict, and a government where there isn't any preset truth about how things are. It is a developing republic of a social experiment, basically, that has this machine, as you said, you know, that governs the process, but the outcome of the process isn't clear, which leads to Americanism as a form of activism. There is no truth to contemplate because there is no ultimate truth on which we can agree. So I'm wondering whether this whole question of common good, republic, and so forth, active and contemplative, doesn't hinge on a fundamental metaphysical outlook on what reality is like, whether it's tragic or not. Both of you big.
Well, Father Anselm, I think so often happens, you got it just right. My own reading of the commitments to be found in our constitutional order identifies those two strands, one of which, articulated most memorably by Madison in Federalist 10, is that it's inevitably conflict. And that's because the causes of faction cannot be eradicated. And that, of course, presupposes the unavailability of grace. In a recent book, the Yale musicologist Paul Rathie gives the history of the composition of that hymn, Amazing Grace. And I don't go to a lot of funerals yet, but I go to some. And I hear Amazing Grace all the time. And I never want to hear it again. Because at Catholic funerals, we shouldn't be singing about a wretch like me. Those of us created in the image and likeness of God, to whom transforming and correcting grace is always offered, above all through the sacraments, but not exclusively, can never adequately, honestly represent ourselves to ourselves as wretches. Now, the man writing that was a former slave trader who was looking back on his life. But what Rathie shows in this study is that the idea of human beings as irredeemably wretches crept into the American culture. And the popularity of the hymn is owing in part to people's identification with that description. And that, it seems to me, is a radically un-Catholic idea with the damaging consequences I summarized in my talk. The other strand of the tradition that I was trying to develop, sometimes inaccurately called Whig Thomism, would allow us to reclaim, as part of that constitutional order, an understanding of the human person as made by nature and raised up by grace for life in community where there are intransitive common goods. And I think, as I was trying to say at the end, that our nation faces a choice between the Americanist model with that defective anthropology and another one that we can reclaim that is much more hopeful because it invites and allows transformation through grace. I have a few words answered. That is a very pertinent insight. It is the idea of a simple division of power can be rooted in a false metaphysic about what society actually is. There's a distinction between division of power and the understanding of subsidiarity, which would be a Catholic understanding of society. And even if materially speaking, a division of powers and a subsidiary society look similar, they are built upon two very different understandings of what society is. A simple division of power is materialistic. It simply understands that we're going to draw a very clear boundary between different spheres of power, and then power will check power simply on a horizontal plane. There's nothing necessarily teleological about this. There's nothing necessarily God-ordered about this. But the idea of subsidiarity is similar in practice, but very different metaphysically. It understands that all societies are structured and ordered towards an end. They have an extrinsic common good. And ultimately, the common good of the whole cosmos extrinsically would be God, the good of all, who is infinitely shareable. All societies are ordered towards the ultimate common good. And they're ordered towards the common good through their own mode. The family is a society. And as the classical thinkers would recognize it as an imperfect society, since it does not contain within itself all the means to achieving its end, which is the full flourishing of its members. So it's a society that that has its own autonomy. In a sense, it has its own sphere of authority, but it is ordered towards another society, which is the polity, the political society, which in turn is ordered towards the good of the whole cosmos. There is a true sense of a division of power in a real Catholic understanding of a subsidiary order, but it is not materialistic. It's not based upon a fundamental, the fundamental paradigm of power checking power. It's based upon spheres of society achieving their perfection in their order to a greater whole.
I may have sort of gotten off on the wrong start in this during my career, but one of the things I have not heard talked about here is the fallibility of man. We're not perfect. I think Madison was his paper somewhere about angels and government. But, men are not angels, so we do need government. And he went on to suggest that imperfect people, you get a collection of imperfect people, that doesn't make a perfect decision-making body. And therefore, there was the need for power to check power. The answer was, I think he said, ambition checks ambition, ambition against ambition. And the balance of powers we have in our federal government, we have the three branches, was one means of dissipating power in any one group or any reflection of people. And Justice Scalia used to talk about this all the time. The American constitutional system is set up to be inefficient. Therefore, for protecting against fads of the day. And as someone who's participated in that, I happen to think that makes a lot of sense. I've served with a lot of members of Congress, and I've yet to meet a perfect one. And I have seen what happens when groups get together. They can be led. I always thought one of the inspirations of the Founding Fathers was they understood that we are imperfect in this world. That while we might strive for perfection, in the religious sense, the spiritual sense, we know that ultimately we're not going to find perfection here on this earth. And to create a system of government which will promise that is to delude the people. So I wonder if my concept of what the Founding Fathers have said, recognizing the fallibility of man and therefore creating a system where you work for the common good, but recognize that you're not most likely going to meet the perfect decision. You may not even ask the perfect question. Say in most cases you don't. Is an argument for the American system. Washington went on to say a number of times that our system of government was established presupposed virtuous people. He said that. The fathers have said that. And even Adam just want to say something about virtue. Maybe that's what we have forgotten. While we are imperfect, we seek to be virtuous. What kind of system can you create that protects against the sense that we're going to have a perfect person created in our society in our time?
We're going to end it on that note, and let's please join me in thanking our three respondents here.
And it's my honor to introduce our student speakers. A few weeks ago, Father Albert sent an email to the students asking them to submit abstracts if they'd like to prepare papers reflecting on the topic of the convocation, which is a reminder, wisdom and the tranquility of order, reflections on Popes Leo XIII and XIV. And students submitted abstracts, and the idea is the best ones would come and be able to present their paper. So we're going to introduce one by one, have them come up to speak and introduce the next one. So first up, we have Morgan Yadrin, a graduate student here at DSPT, pursuing concurrent MAs in philosophy and theology. His research interests include New Testament scholarship, eschatology, and apocalyptic literature. His work engages the interpretation of texts within the Catholic intellectual tradition, and he also works with medieval manuscripts as part of his St. Albert's assistantship here at DSPT. Let's please welcome Morgan.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll just get right into it. So, modern accounts of social and political order frequently ground stability in mechanisms of power, procedural neutrality, or juridical control. When deployed, such approaches may secure a degree of external coherence, and often do so at the cost of a deeper intelligibility of order itself. Order in these frameworks becomes something imposed rather than something understood, often misrepresenting the needs of a society and its deeper purpose. Against this backdrop, Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Aeterni Patris represents not merely a revival of Thomistic philosophy, but a retrieval of wisdom as a fundamental mode of knowing. Leo's concern is not simply the defense of Catholic doctrine against error, ancient and modern alike, but the restoration of reason's capacity to perceive and participate in an objective order grounded in being itself. This retrieval resonates deeply with Augustine's conception of tranquillitas ordinis, the peace that arises when things are rightly ordered according to their nature and end within the hierarchy of creation. For Augustine, peace is not the absence of conflict, but the harmony that flows from order, a harmony that persists even amid suffering and disorder, insofar as existence itself remains intelligible. My paper will argue that Pope Leo XIII's retrieval of Thomistic philosophy in Aeterni Patris as a sapiential mode of knowing re-articulates Augustine's Tranquillitas Ordinis by restoring wisdom as the principle through which human reason and law participate in an objective metaphysical order, according to which beings are ordered to their nature and final end. Firstly, how must reason function? Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Aeterni Patris is often read primarily as a call for the revival of Thomistic philosophy within Catholic intellectual life. Drawing upon the Church Fathers and the scholastic tradition, Leo details the recovery of philosophy when used in its proper form. By attending to the restoration of wisdom as the principle to which philosophy serves truth, he illuminates the way in which theology, law, and social life can rightly flourish. While this retrieval is indeed central to the encyclical, Leo's concern extends beyond the recovery of a particular historical school. At stake is the restoration of wisdom, or sapientia, as the proper mode by which reason apprehends reality. Leo reasons, quote, "Philosophy, if rightly made use of by the wise, in a certain way tends to smooth and fortify the road to true faith, and to prepare the souls of its disciples for the fit reception of revelation." He goes on to say, "But if natural reason first sowed this rich field of doctrine before it was rendered fruitful by the power of Christ, it must assuredly become more prolific after the grace of the Savior has renewed and added to the native faculties of the human mind." For Leo, philosophy is not merely a technical exercise in argumentation, but a stepping stone to the Christian faith and a disciplined participation in truth ordered towards God. Leo's emphasis on wisdom reflects a distinctly Thomistic rendition of reason's vocation. Human reason, while possessing its own integrity, is not self-sufficient when severed from wisdom and faith. Rather, reason is oriented towards being itself and attains its perfection when it is rightly ordered to truth, elevated and perfected by the grace of Christ. Recalling Aquinas' hierarchical powers of life, just as a plant is perfected through nourishment and an animal through perception and appetite, the human soul is perfected according to its nature through the exercise of intellect. Grace does not replace or extend this natural operation, but elevates the intellect to a higher mode of participation in truth, ordering it towards a supernatural end. In this sense, wisdom is not opposed to rational inquiry, but names its highest fulfillment insofar as reason participates in divine truth. Now, detached from this principle, philosophy becomes fragmented, provisional, incongruous, and increasingly dependent upon the authority or preference of individual thinkers. To quote Leo again, he says, "Those, therefore, who to the study of philosophy unite obedience to the Christian faith are philosophizing in the best possible way, as faith frees and saves reason from error and endows it with manifold knowledge." Excuse me. Leo is very astute to point out that the great philosophers of antiquity exhibited genuine reason, yet they lacked the supernatural grace necessary for true philosophy, making their reasoning susceptible to error. It is precisely this fragmentation that Leo diagnoses in modern intellectual life. He observes that many contemporary philosophical systems, such as schools of philosophy and orders of the state, are grounded in materialism and are skeptical of metaphysical truth. These enterprises lack the stability necessary to sustain coherent knowledge. as they may exhibit technical sophistication, yet remain incapable of providing a unified and objective account of reality. By contrast, the Thomistic tradition Leo espouses offers a philosophy that is stable and robust, precisely because it is grounded in an objective order of being, rather than in the fluctuating judgments of human will. So, the recovery of wisdom, therefore, is not an antiquarian project. Rather, it's a necessity for modern intellectual fragmentation. Wisdom restores reason's capacity to discern order, hierarchy, and intelligibility within reality itself. And only when reason is thus ordered can it serve as a reliable foundation for theology, law, and social life. Aeterni Patris thus establishes wisdom as the mediating principle through which human reason is aligned with truth, preparing the ground for Leo's broader account of natural law and social order. Leo's retrieval of wisdom thus provides an ample groundwork for Augustine's conception of tranquillitas ordinis. If wisdom orders reason, what is the order that reason is meant to see? Flip the page here. It is this question which brings me to my second point. What order is grounded in? Augustine's account of tranquillitas ordinis in his work City of God provides the ontological depth necessary to understand Leo XIII's retrieval of wisdom as more than a methodological preference. For Augustine, peace is not primarily a state of mind or a political achievement, but the condition that arises when beings are rightly ordered according to their nature and end, subordinated to one another and to the whole. Order in this sense is not imposed externally, but belongs to the very structure of reality itself. Peace is therefore derivative of order, not its source. Just how the peace of the body consists of the duly proportioned arrangement of its parts, Augustine espouses that, quote, "The peace of all things is the tranquility of order, that which allots things equal and unequal to their respective place." Augustine here shows that peace is structural rather than psychological. It names the fitting arrangement of parts within the whole. This metaphysical priority of order becomes especially clear in Augustine's treatment of suffering, conflict, and misery. Augustine insists that even those who are quote-unquote wretched are not wholly deprived of peace, insofar as they continue to exist within an ordered creation. Disorder, pain, and war presuppose a more fundamental harmony and reality, as beings must possess form, structure, and intelligibility in order to suffer or even act against order at all. Absolute disorder would entail non-being, and non-being cannot suffer, rebel, or wage war. In this way, Augustine reveals that conflict is always parasitic upon order, and misery upon being. Recall Augustine saying, quote, "There may be life without pain, while there cannot be pain without some kind of life." Tranquillitas ordinis thus names not the absence of tension, but the harmony that flows from the proper placement of beings within the hierarchy of creation. Keep in mind that this harmony may be wounded, resisted, or obscured by sin, yet it is never annihilated. Even in states of moral disorder, the underlying intelligibility of being remains. And while earthly peace may be imperfect and provisional, it ultimately is subordinate to the eschatological peace of God. Indeed, it is God's quote-unquote heavenly city, where true order is fulfilled with no disruption of sin. Augustine's account therefore resists any conception of peace grounded merely in stability or coercion. Peace cannot be begotten by force, for it is rooted in the ontological structure of reality, ordered by God rather than in the exercise of power. So this rich Augustinian framework illuminates Leo XIII's insistence that wisdom must serve as the ordering principle of reason and law. If we accept that order is metaphysical before it is political, then law cannot function merely as an instrument of control or neutrality. Therefore, law must participate in the objective order of being that wisdom apprehends. Leo's retrieval of Thomistic philosophy thus stands in continuity with Augustine's vision. Both reject the notion that order can stand alone from truth, and both affirm that authentic peace arises only where reason is rightly aligned with the nature and end of things. By inextricably binding peace to order and order in being, Augustine provides the metaphysical grammar through which Leo XIII's project becomes intelligible. Tranquillitas Ordinis is not an ideal to be opposed on reality, but it is a condition to be recognized and participated in through wisdom. This recognition prepares the way for Leo's account of natural law, in which human reason, ordered by wisdom, mediates between divine law and human action within an intelligible moral order. If wisdom orders reason and order grounds peace, the remaining question now is mediation. How does this metaphysical order actually shape human action, law, and social life? For Leo XIII, the answer lies in natural law, understood not as the mere juridical framework or set of imposed rules, but as the rational participation of human reason in an objective moral order, grounded in being itself. Wisdom enables this participation by allowing reason to discern not only what is, but what ought to be in light of human nature and our final end. So for Leo, law does not generate moral order, but it presupposes it. And within this Thomistic framework, law functions properly only insofar as it remains oriented toward truth and the telos of the human person, which is God. When law is divorced from wisdom, it becomes distorted and leans towards coercion or perhaps proceduralism, where order is maintained without reference to substantive goods. In both cases, stability may be achieved in some respect, but tranquillitas ordinis is lost, since peace no longer arises from the harmony of rightly ordered things. Historically, political communities, such as political Christendom, once presupposed that law itself was subject to an objective moral order beyond the will of rulers or the consensus of laypersons. While such arrangements were never perfect, they provided a shared horizon for evaluating law according to truth rather than mere effectiveness. As this sapiential horizon receded, law became corrupted and increasingly became a matter of technique and administration, retaining its force while losing its intelligibility. Leo XIII's retrieval of wisdom offers a diagnostic response to this condition. By grounding natural law in sapiential reason, Leo insists that law must participate in truth if it is to serve human flourishing. Wisdom does not eliminate conflict or impose perfection, but it preserves the intelligibility of moral order within history. In this way, natural law functions as the practical expression of tranquillitas ordinis, mediating between metaphysical order and social life, so that peace may arise from understanding rather than control. To conclude, Pope Leo XIII's retrieval of Thomistic wisdom in Aeterni Patris is neither a nostalgic or antiquarian return to past political forms, fideism, nor a rejection of modernity, but a diagnostic effort to restore reason's capacity to perceive and participate in an objective order of truth, elevated and perfected by the grace of Christ. Read in continuity with Augustine's Tranquillitas Ordinis, Leo shows that peace arises not from control, but from wisdom rightly ordering reason, law, and social life towards their proper ends. In recovering wisdom as the form of order itself, Leo offers a framework capable of addressing modern disorder without abandoning the metaphysical commitments of the Catholic tradition. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Next up, we have Marissa Nichols, who is pursuing here at DSPT a certificate in philosophy. She works as the editor and writer for The Valley Catholic, the magazine for the Diocese of San Jose. She also hosts the magazine's podcast, which she added is to the chagrin of her teenage children. Please welcome Marissa.
Thank you. The title of my paper is Matching the Design of the Creator. Now that's wisdom. What does it mean to have wisdom, to order things wisely in the age of the AI revolution? St. Augustine's Tranquility of Order gives us the starting and the end point as the perfectly ordered and harmonious enjoyment of God and of one another in God. End quote. That was a quote. That definition raises a pressing question for us today. Does our use of AI help us to enjoy God and one another in God more fully or less? Please allow me a very domestic example. Earlier this year, my 15-year-old son, a high school sophomore, came to me and asked, "Mom, is it okay to use ChatGPT to write my papers?" My answer, I'm a writer, right? My answer, apart from an emphatic no, was this: "Son, we want to hear your voice, not AI's voice." Upon reflection, this motherly instinct reflects some of Augustine's insight. I want to enjoy my son, his thoughts, his reasoning, his growth, in the God-given intellectual capacity he's been given, genuinely. And I'm sure his teachers want that too. Now, even this simple example points to something Pope Leo said just last week when his talk for his message for the 60th World Day of Social Communications was released. When speaking of our technological achievements, he offered the quote, "The question at heart is not what machines can or will be able to do, but what we can and will be able to achieve by growing in humanity and knowledge through the wise use of the powerful tools at our service." In other words, we succeed in ordering the world wisely only if our tools help us grow in appreciation of what is irreplaceable about the human person. For that to happen, the Holy Father tells us that all technological advancement, quote, must reflect the design of the Creator, intelligent, relational, and guided by love. What does that look like in practice? I submit that having wisdom today in the age of Pope Leo, in the age of the AI revolution, means putting on the garment of goodness, expressed as utilizing our technology for the common good, the intellectual good, and the spiritual good, especially in the care for the poor. Only in this way does our nature truly achieve the good, our final cause, towards which we tend. We act wisely when we use new technologies in ways that bring humanity together, ways that affirm the irreplaceability of human experience and recognize through the sharing of our real lives, perhaps through storytelling, as I can attest, hearts and souls that are transformed for Christ. Also in the Holy Father's message for the 60th World Day of Social Communications, he names real risks that exist when we do not order the world wisely. Some include algorithmic created echo chambers and information bias caused by those who control that flow of information, the danger of replacing human genius with an artificial one, privacy violations, the phenomenon of deep fakes, and all of this causes the erosion of trust in a society that does not check its inventions, which leads to greater isolationism. He also touches on the anthropomorphization of AI, whereby we substitute conversations with our generative AI bot for real relationships. Regarding this last point, which deals with what it truly means to be authentically relational, his message contains both a warning and a call. The warning is this: do not substitute digital friendship for real human friendship. Otherwise, quote, we are robbed of the opportunity to encounter others who are always different from ourselves and with whom we can and must learn to relate. The call is one to be truly relational. We must cherish communication. This is another quote. Quote, we must cherish communication as the deepest truth of humanity, toward which all technological innovation should be oriented. This call also requires that we, quote, raise our voice in defense of human persons so that we can truly assimilate these tools as allies. The common good, then, in short, requires that we constantly delineate between ourselves and our innovations as tools and never confuse the two if we are to have peace as a society. And all peace, as St. Augustine reminds us, is the tranquility of order. Ordering the world wisely also requires protecting our human intellectual good. Referencing the Vatican note Antiqua et Nova, the Holy Father teaches that, quote, a proper understanding of human intelligence cannot be reduced to the mere acquisition of facts or the ability to perform tasks. It involves openness to the ultimate questions of life and an orientation toward the true and the good. No matter how advanced our inventions become, they will never ponder life's deepest mysteries or find their answers in God. Human beings are equally irreplaceable in caring for one another, and especially in caring for the poor. Indeed, in De Lexite, the Holy Father stresses that generosity to the poor actually benefits those who exercise it. It is for our good to do good. Only when we care for one another, as only humans can we reflect the Creator's design, intelligent, relational, and guided by love. So what might all this look like practically for society and the church? Once ethical guardrails for AI are in place, and once our technologies are aligned with human dignity, I submit that if we get this right, if we truly succeed in ordering the world wisely, the end game of the AI revolution is this: that we will turn to one another more, not less. That we will recognize the power of lived experience and share our stories more intentionally, freely, and generously, because, as the Holy Father has said, quote, each of us possesses an irreplaceable and inimitable vocation originating from lived experience and becoming manifest through interaction with others. In my work as a diocesan writer and editor, I witness the power of storytelling on a daily basis. I have the enormous privilege of listening to stories from all over the diocese. I use technology, including AI, for practical tasks, generating interview questions, sorting through pages and pages of transcripts, highlighting themes. But even then, I am the final human filter, and I never ever just accept whatever AI generates. This is because for every article I write, I know the angle I'm going for. I alone have interacted with people. I've heard their voice. I have laughed with them, cried with them, and I've experienced the nuances of their words, the words they use to tell their stories. And the stories themselves, they are inimitably human. Take, for instance, the story of Father Jerry Wade. He's 92 years young. He's now ministering at the Jesuit Retirement Center in Los Altos. He has spent nearly his whole life at Bellarmine College Preparatory in San Jose, memorizing the names and the family members' names of the people he's met. He is as sharp as a tack, and he's probably one of the best people I've ever met. Then there's Father Chris Bologo, who integrates his Nigerian heritage into his priesthood and his ecological research. And now he's calling attention to the global water crisis in the US. Then there's Annette, who, after hearing a single homily, from a visiting priest from India at her parish, founded a nonprofit to build and run a school in West Bengal for the Santhal tribe, India's largest and poorest indigenous community. And then there's Sister Ana Maria Pineda, who is the niece of a Father Rutilio Grande, who was martyred in El Salvador. I am humbled that she and all of these people have allowed me the privilege of telling their stories. AI cannot generate anything like these stories. The human experience of God cannot be manufactured. And now more than ever, following what the Holy Father has shared, these stories must be shared, and they must be experienced if we are to anchor ourselves to our humanity. If the tranquility of order is the enjoyment of God of one another, and enjoyment of God and of one another in God, then enjoying these stories is essential to becoming who we were meant to be, of becoming a better version of ourselves. Tools are great, but as the Holy Father puts it, quote, we need faces and voices to speak for people again. Whether you are an editor or writer or a professor or a student or just a person, there is no substitute for face-to-face contact where we listen, swap stories, and allow ourselves to be transformed by the work of God in one another. And that's the end game. The AI remains a tool, something we can use, appreciate, and set aside. A tool that serves the common good, from global communications all the way down to a mom telling her son that no, he cannot use ChatGPT to write his papers. And for the record, I did find out his school does run student papers through an AI checker anyway, so phew. What does it mean to have wisdom in the age of Pope Leo XIV? It means putting on the garment of goodness for the intellectual good, the common good, and our spiritual good. And it means connecting with one another genuinely, sharing our stories generously as we reflect the design of the Creator, intelligently, relationally, and always guided by love. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marissa. Third, we have Brother Jordan Martin, who's a student brother from Western Dominican province, originally from Montreal, Canada. He studied film production in Montreal before being drawn to philosophy. Brother Jordan completed his MA in philosophy here at DSPT recently and is now enrolled in the Master's Divinity program. Please welcome Brother Jordan.
Thank you, Brother Pascal. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. It's an honor to be able to share a few words on our popes, the Leos. When the merchant searching for fine pearls finds a pearl of great price, he goes and sells all that he has and buys it. What is this pearl of great price over which no other should be preferred? St. Gregory the Great says that the pearl of great price could be the life of heaven in its glory, to which man shall prefer no other good. St. Augustine says that the pearl of great price could be Christ, to which man shall prefer no other master. St. John Chrysostom and St. Jerome say that the pearl of great price could be the gospel teaching, to which man shall prefer no other teaching. These are all excellent interpretations, and I want to suggest to you one more that I think is valid. The pearl of great price could be contemplation, to which man shall prefer no other activity, and more specifically, contemplation of God. And one reason for saying so, among others, is that in the Summa Contra Gentiles, St. Thomas writes, the best thing for man is to become attached in his mind to God and divine things. The best thing for man, that is the pearl of great price, is to become attached in his mind to God and divine things. In other words, to contemplate God. Happily, the contemplation of God is something that we can already do in this life. Very imperfectly for sure, but we can do it. How marvelous. Indeed, it is not as if we had to travel the whole world to find the pearl of great price. We already have it. It is not in the heavens that you should say, "Who will go up to the heavens to get it for us?" Nor is it across the sea that you should say, "Who will cross the sea to get it for us?" No, it is something very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart. So I want to suggest to you, and this is probably the most important thing I want to say today, that a truly wise man is someone who regularly contemplates God and understands that everything else that he might do is directly or indirectly ordered to the contemplation of God. Now, in today's world, that entails that this wise man, this man who regularly contemplates God, would be able, among other things, to live well with machines in a virtuous and orderly way. Well, for many, if not for most, learning to live well with machines is an art that can take some time to master. Why? Because the art of living well with machines cannot be learned simply by using machines that are user-friendly. No. The art of living well with machines mainly stems from a sound understanding of what machines are and of what we think our relationship to them is and should be. And this can take some time to figure out. In other words, when a new machine or a new technology comes out, it is not always obvious to us what it is and how we are to use it fruitfully. In the times of Leo XIII, industrial machinery came with the great promise of helping man to produce artificial things more quickly and in greater quantity, so as to optimize manual labor. And if man could do manual labor more quickly, as a logical consequence, it should have ended up making man freer for contemplation of God. However, in too many cases, man did not become freer for contemplation. Rather than selling everything to buy the pearl of great price, that is contemplation, man got more involved in this industrial endeavor, not only producing the artificial things necessary to his well-being, but producing a multitude of artificial things that he would never have desired had he not made them. Again and again, Leo XIII preached against a type of intensive labor that would alienate man and turn him away from God, because Leo believed that work should rather make more manifest man's great dignity and likeness to his Creator. Despite Leo's teaching, too many men got their minds caught in the frenzy of massive production and in the unending race for technical progress, rather than applying their minds to the contemplation of God. Today, Leo XIV, our new Pope, points out that artificial intelligence pose new challenges for the defense of human dignity. Indeed, we do have to think about how many tasks we should farm out, so to speak, to AI. AI came with this great promise of helping man to optimize the so-called intellectual labor inherent to many desk jobs. That is, to successfully perform some computational or logical mathematical labor in a quick fashion. And if man could do these tasks more quickly, as a logical consequence, it should make him freer for contemplation of God. But will it be the case? That's the question. We might end up being so fascinated with AI that we will hardly be able to stop thinking of new things we can ask AI to do, of new computational tasks we can ask AI to perform for us. In Leo XIII's time, we got caught in a boom of massive production. Well, today with AI, if we are not wise enough, we might get caught in a sort of massive whirlwind of data cluttering. Antiqua et Nova, a theological note issued exactly a year ago by the Vatican, states, quote, "The appearance of AI calls for a renewed appreciation of all that is human. Years ago, the French Catholic author Georges Bernanos warned that the danger is not in the multiplication of machines, but in the ever-increasing number of men accustomed from their childhood to desire only what machines can give." Let me repeat this. The danger is not in the multiplication of machines, but in the ever-increasing number of men accustomed from their childhood to desire only what machines can give. And the Vatican document continues saying, quote, "The vast expanse of the world's knowledge is now accessible in ways that would have filled past generations with awe. However, to ensure that advancements in knowledge do not become humanly or spiritually barren, one must go beyond the mere accumulation of data and strive to achieve true wisdom." In other words, we might get so distracted by what AI can do and so accustomed to constantly being distracted by AI that we could slowly lose sight of what we can do as human beings. And chiefly, we could lose sight of the best thing that we can do, namely, to contemplate God. We have the pearl of contemplation in our hand, but how easy would it be to get distracted by all these shiny things out there that AI can do? My dear friends, to be honest with you, for the moment I know very little about AI. But since AI is a kind of machine, there is one thing that I know for sure about AI. It is that, like any other machine, in fact, that like any other artificial thing, AI should ultimately be meant to help us, whether directly or very indirectly, to contemplate God. If AI ends up taking us away from contemplation, then there is something wrong with how we use it. But if AI helps us to be done faster with some computational tasks so that we can move on more quickly to the contemplation of divine things, then praise the Lord. May AI be a fruitful tool for all of us, and above all, let us be good merchants, and may we never sell off this pearl that we already have, the pearl of the contemplation of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Jordan. To finish up our student panel, we have Max Hirsch, who is a third-year PhD student in applied math at UC Berkeley and an MA philosophy student here at DSPT. His math research includes both theoretical and applied aspects of statistical inference and machine learning for scientific computing and numerical analysis. He has related philosophical interests in metaphysics and epistemology and is particularly motivated by questions related to the philosophies of science and mathematics. Please welcome Max.
So first I would like to thank our President, Father Albert, and our Dean, Brother Pascal, for affording me the opportunity to share this reflection with all of you. Seeing as the impact of artificial intelligence is or will be, in a way, all-encompassing yet unknown, and given the context in which we find ourselves here at the Dominican school, I felt that it would be fitting to discuss how education factors into the present and hopefully continuing discussions regarding AI and the tranquility of order. And indeed, AI does pose a threat to tranquility in the educational sphere. There are threats to intellectual and spiritual goods due to students' reliance on large language models for doing their work, and due to bad philosophies which arise from academics and researchers. There are threats to material goods with the risk of mass unemployment. There are threats to the person on account of the state's ability to steer disciplines at universities. And there are threats to unity among people, which is most clearly seen as a result of the polarizing effect of AI-based recommendation systems. So I want to pose a simple, broad question. How should we organize education as Catholics in light of the teaching of the Church and the AI revolution to promote this tranquility of order? This isn't a question I can attempt to answer in full in these short remarks. Instead, I hope to give some ideas which may serve as the basis for discussion today and going forward. Our guides will be Pope Leo XIII, who laid the foundations of Catholic social teaching in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, and our present Pope, Pope Leo XIV, who chose his name in the current AI revolution in homage to Leo XIII. In the rest of my remarks, I will draw from Pope Leo XIII's encyclicals Aeterni, Patris, and Rerum Novarum in formulating 4 major themes which inform an approach to AI in Catholic education, fairly broadly construed. And I will show how these themes are already reflected in Pope Leo XIV's pontificate thus far. First, education as it relates to the person and state can be considered with a view toward understanding how the relations between the person and himself and between the person and the state are actually or potentially. In this respect, I will discuss 3 themes, namely spiritual and intellectual formation, the role of material prosperity in education, and the relation between the person and the state. Second, the relations between person and state in education can be considered with an eye toward action or change. On this point, I will briefly mention the way in which associations serve to unify people to achieve common goals, and I will underscore the importance of such associations. So first, spiritual and intellectual formation is holistic. I will first elaborate on the threats I mentioned, which AI poses to spiritual and intellectual formation. First, there's the decline of intellectual virtues. This is not a new phenomenon. Students, for example, can't do basic arithmetic because they rely on calculators. Many students do not think and instead attempt to memorize procedures to pass a test. I'm thinking about math, which will lead to utter failure. Given an easy way out, many people take it. Why are calculators allowed in school in the first place? There seems to be a number of reasons, among which is the difficulty in teaching so many students to meet the standards for a standardized test. In other words, the goal of teaching becomes something other than formation of the student. It becomes a sort of mechanized task, something subhuman. It's important to emphasize here the importance of delineating the goal or end of education and understanding that as a measure of the goodness of any particular approach to it. Furthermore, it is important that our ultimate goal vivifies our work, that goal being union with God. This goal informs all others and gives them shape. Great error results when this goal is lost from sight, so it's critical that students be protected from this misstep. That's why Pope Leo XIII in Aeterni Patris explains regarding philosophical missteps, I quote, "Domestic and civil society even, which, as all see, is exposed to great danger from this plague of perverse opinions, would certainly enjoy a far more peaceful and secure existence if a more wholesome doctrine were taught in the universities and high schools even, one more in conformity with the teaching of the Church, such as is contained in the works of Thomas Aquinas." Unquote. However, in the same document, he explains that we must be open to what is good in new discoveries, which can be to the service of philosophy and which tends to the development of learning. When it comes to calculators, there's an impulse by some people, including myself, to do away with them completely until much later in education. Similarly, there will be an impulse by some people to avoid AI altogether, but there can be good uses of technology. When learning biology, for example, a student who knows English as a second language can find difficulty reading on a test, but may know the biology concepts being tested. Without a doubt, the student needs to learn English. But if the purpose of the test is to assess whether the student understands biology, allowing the student headphones with audio to instead hear the test can aid in assessing the student and can aid in growth in reading skill, mind you. Pope Leo XIV explained at the 60th World Day of Social Communications that it is increasingly urgent to introduce media, information, and AI literacy into education systems at all levels. AI is not a topic that can merely be avoided. As a Catholic, we always look for the good. We ask, what is the best thing to do? In the same message, the Pope explained, just as the Industrial Revolution called for basic literacy to enable people to respond to new developments, so too does the digital revolution require digital literacy, along with humanistic and cultural education, to understand how algorithms shape our perception of reality, how AI biases work, what mechanisms determine the presence of certain content in our feeds, what the economic principles and models of the AI economy are, and how they might change. It's important to notice just how extensive that this AI literacy is that Pope Leo is referring to. But again, philosophical literacy is even more important to the extent that it leads people to see the truth of the faith. AI practitioners can come up with some very dangerous ideas left to their own devices. For example, a few years ago, some researchers from Google DeepMind had a paper entitled "Reward is Enough," published in the journal Artificial Intelligence. The first sentences of its abstract are, in this article, we hypothesize that intelligence and its associated abilities can be understood as subserving the maximization of reward. Accordingly, reward is enough to drive behavior that exhibits abilities studied in natural and artificial intelligence, including knowledge, learning, perception, social intelligence, language, generalization, and imitation. Okay. If the reward of a general AI agent is that of survival, one very good strategy that may be learned is to kill any human being who approaches. Yikes. Believe it or not, there are very attractive aspects of this notion of reward maximization. If a position like this is not refuted in broad terms, but is seriously grappled with, not only can human dignity be more effectively be defended, but greater philosophical clarity can be achieved by seeing the weak points in one's own philosophy and the philosophy of another. Okay, second point, the church cares about material prosperity. Regarding material concerns surrounding AI, the biggest concern in the immediate future is unemployment. Factory jobs, software engineering, mathematics, law, and many other fields will be and are being radically changed by AI. If AI makes production more efficient, many employers will give work to machines rather than people. This will lead to a shift in the areas which people choose to study, and this raises an important point for the Christian. Education is a route for the poor to drastically improve their lives. Pope Leo XIII explains in Rerum Novarum, neither must it be supposed that the solicitude of the Church is so preoccupied with the spiritual concerns of her children as to neglect their temporal and earthly interests. Her desire is that the poor, for example, should rise above poverty and wretchedness and better their condition in life, and for this she makes a strong endeavor. Pope Leo XIV in De Lexite clearly shows the Church's concern in this respect and devotes a section particularly to poverty and education. He reminds us that education has always been one of the highest expressions of Christian charity. He gives numerous examples of saints and religious congregations who made their goal intellectual, religious, and moral education of poor youth, among others St. John Baptist de La Salle and the many female congregations of the 18th and 19th centuries. He continues to explain that a Catholic education is for transforming the lives of the poor and for forming professionals and integral development of the human person and for a better society. Okay, third point. The relation between state and person on the topic of steering universities. So regarding the relation between the state and the person in the context of education, there are several issues I can't cover in depth. They include state-designed curricula, options for private schools, state funding of universities, and more. So I'll briefly say more on funding from the state. Because practically speaking, the state has its own interests, often pursued without regard to the common good. One should be aware of the effect this has on the public university. State funding is allocated to particular disciplines and not to others. This in turn affects the disciplines which students choose to pursue. It particularly affects the things which academics choose to research. Plenty of projects in the sciences are funded by the National Science Foundation and various military branches, and it's clear to everyone in the sciences that artificial intelligence is a major selling point of a grant proposal. A danger is that the academic becomes in a sense owned by the state without freedom, and that everything begins to be done for the sake of work. This leads to the mindset of the so-called intellectual worker, which Josef Pieper warns against in his book Leisure, the Basis of Culture. There needs to be room for leisure in the sense Pieper uses the term, or else there cannot be worship, he argues. I highly recommend the book. And then finally, associations, a means for achieving these goals. One final emphasis of Pope Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum is on associations and unions as a means for achieving the good of society. Addressing AI is a fundamentally interdisciplinary endeavor. It requires understanding the difficulties which it poses to various peoples, but AI itself assists in dividing people. If you're on YouTube at all, you know exactly what I mean. The recommendation system is such that it drives people to polarization. And how do we counteract polarization? Thomists cannot just talk with Thomists. AI practitioners cannot just talk among themselves. It is actually important to have dialogue. In Pope Leo XIV's joint declaration with Bartholomew I, they write, "We believe that authentic interreligious dialogue, far from being a cause of syncretism and confusion, is essential for the coexistence of peoples of different traditions and cultures." I want to conclude by way of example. An increasingly popular educational model among Catholics today is a liberal education, or an education based around the so-called great books. Two former leaders of prominent Great Books College claim that such a program is aimed at the intrinsically best education. One prominent Catholic voice today explains that the liberal arts program at her college does not attempt to prepare students for any career. Many of the advocates of these educational models heavily emphasize the freeing aspect of education, which is good, but it's not clear how well the models promote other aspects of education. How and to what extent should an education attempt to prepare students for a career? Clearly, Pope Leo XIV teaches that education can help lift people out of poverty. Also, if the great books are studied, what room is there for incorporating AI literacy, which Pope Leo XIV calls for? Many great books programs involve, for example, a mathematics curriculum, which is difficult to bring to the practical sphere. There are many alternatives to Euclidean geometry, for example, which are just as beautiful and true, but which open many more doors to further study in other disciplines, including AI. This might further point to difficulties which a student of the great books or liberal learning programs may find in engaging colleagues in other disciplines, but this sort of unity is of utmost importance. There is certainly a distinct approach which Catholics should have to education, but it requires work and thought. There are many questions about Catholic education which I hope we can discuss to make progress toward unifying man with society and with himself in opposition to the difficulties posed by AI. Thank you.
All right. I think we have some time for questions. So, yeah, if you could grab the other mic.
Thank you all for your talk. This one is primarily directed at Brother Jordan and Max here. It's kind of in the spirit of what Father Raphael Mary was talking about in terms of sort of remembering that Christ is sort of like the order in which we're all meant to be, like to emulate. So without understanding of the human person, your Christology is going to be troublesome, and vice versa. I wanted to ask, both with respect to contemplation of God, but also in education, and also as well to what Marissa was talking about with her son, how should we, like, what kind of attitude should we have towards educating the younger people, and I'm a high school teacher, so I interact with high schoolers who frequently use AI in front of me, in fact, to the point where I have to take their laptops. How can we encourage that desire for contemplation, something that they already have in the education system, not in the universities per se, but much earlier on in their formation as they grow more and more into who they are?
That's a good question. I think especially for younger people, I think it has to begin from a positive experience of study and contemplation, that it can be pleasant. It doesn't need to be a drag to be at school, basically. It can be fun. And I can learn something and think about beautiful things. I think that's part of the answer, at least for me. And I think we can encourage young students to understand as well that there's an awesome value at working at a perfection that is within you, not in some kind of outside mechanism out there. So what we were speaking, I don't want to hear what the machine says. I want to hear what you think. So to kind of build this habit of, I want to become someone who thinks well and can articulate my thought, to foster that in any possible way, I would say.
There are a couple of things I would emphasize. So we want to, the student, our goal in teaching is to have the student see the proper relations between things, a proper ordering of things. And a lot of times students just don't see the end towards which they're working. So there are different educational philosophies you'll find out, or like practical ways of teaching. So a popular thing that you'll see in schools today is project-based learning. So they're trying to integrate knowledge with something tangible. An example in mathematics would be maybe you're applying some mathematics you're learning to this practical problem, and you have to understand both the mathematics simultaneously, but understand its relation to the real world. And you can pick an application that the student finds interesting. So maybe a student is interested in learning AI, and they're learning calculus for the first time. There's a ton you can do. The problem is that in high schools and lower, a lot of teachers just aren't equipped, from what I can tell. Like they don't see the end of the discipline. So like a math teacher in high school doesn't know where that math can lead the student. All they know is enough to relay the information. But and this is some hesitancy I have towards certain great books programs, where the teacher is not necessarily an expert in the field, because it's important for the teacher to be able to guide the student to where they can go, and to give them new problems which are in their capability, but which they don't necessarily know that they can approach yet. So you're helping the student see the relation and help them discover it themselves. And there's something just wonderful about that. Yeah.
Sorry, I was behind the podium. Hi. So, so you're a high school student. What subject do you teach? Okay, so you're in a private high. Okay, yeah. So I'm also a trained high school teacher. I taught English, and so it's kind of cool because I really appreciate Max's perspective. I have no idea how to use AI for math. I just know how to use it from like a writing perspective. I can only speak to really, I think, two things. Number one, what my kids' high school does is really practical. Even with their phones, they have to put their phones in these yonder pouches. When they're on campus, they can't even, use AI in class. And then the AI checker I mentioned in my talk. But also I remember as a high school teacher, I don't know if I want to say it this way, but I prided myself in getting in front of something before the students were there. So AI is here, right? So if you become the expert in it, and if you integrate it into your curriculum, I know you guys are going to use AI for this. Why don't you search using this query? What you actually do is you're teaching them how to use it as a tool. and you're teaching them the way you want them to do it. Kind of your surreptitious way of teaching them with the tool, and just, you know, treating it as something that's not, that's the second thing, just not treating it as something that we should just totally avoid, because I feel like that's just going to lead to rebellion anyway. So I don't know if that's helpful, but yeah.
For any of you, picking up on something Brother Jordan said, that this idea that when a new technology or machine is invented, it's not immediately clear what it is. I wonder if you've, I guess, I think there's a kind of an assumption that we often make because, as you just said, it's here, right? So there's kind of an assumption that we will use it in some way, and I wonder if to what degree any of you have thought about, like, should we use it at all? And without falling into like a reactionary, fear-based, like, this is new and therefore we shouldn't use it. But I think of the example of something like contraception, that, you know, when it was being invented, even among Catholics, it wasn't clear to many people how it could be used or if it could be used. And then after Humanae Vitae, you know, it kind of becomes clear, and now even if there are some legitimate uses, they're very narrow and not really for the intended purpose of the technology. So not to say that there's no legitimate use, but just I wonder what you think about a kind of more critical attitude toward the use of AI at all.
I think that's a really great question. I probably can give you like a psychological perspective, because that's what I graduated in for my undergrad. Like all, I guess, like detrimental things, it's hard to see like the immediate results right away. But studies are starting to come out that there's some sort of cognitive resource that's depleted from the mind when you use AI. Particularly within younger ages where like the brain is still forming. And not only that, there's a depletion of gray matter in the brain, so the neuron bundles are less likely to fire, and it just completely impairs your thinking. And so it makes me think of my senior year of college, where I worked in this psychology lab, and we studied the effects of artificial intelligence on memory. And particularly within older people, older populations, and younger populations. And the overall consensus is that it impairs your thinking to a great extent. But maybe perhaps just like reminiscent to like the 1950s and 60s, where they said, oh, like cigarettes are good for you, until they finally understood like the long-term effects of it. I think you can apply that to today. Where we're just now starting to see just how detrimental it is. But I don't think I've ever seen in such a short amount of time, because if I'm not mistaken, I guess like maybe ChatGPT or Google Gemini or what have you, like these major AI platforms didn't start cropping up on the scene until like 2020, 2021. So part of me thinks like it's too early to tell, but at the same time, like I've never seen this early on detrimental effects as such. So,
and I think the only thing I wanted to add to that is that it is so new, and even he's only been Pope for what, 9 months now, Pope Leo, and he has already written so much on this topic. And so I'm really sort of taking my own cues from him too. As a diocesan editor, I try to keep in touch with what he is saying about it, and he is just saying so much. So I highly encourage, you know, everyone to just even read the statement I referenced in my talk just a week ago, literally a week ago. It's really comprehensive, and I was super impressed because, you know, I'm a millennial. I think I have a great sense of technology, but everything he put out, and he's not a millennial, I learned something, and I did not know all these, you know, issues even existed. So I'm kind of taking my cues from him.
So I guess one thing I would want to get straight is what we mean by AI, because AI's actually been around a pretty long time, and I think what we're referring most to as AI right now is like these chatbots. And I mean, there are plenty of applications of AI that are nice. Like, you know, on the one hand, you can use computer vision for diagnosing something in a medical scan, and it can be more accurate than a human. But at the same time, that exact same thing can be used for mass surveillance in China, right? No, and it actually is. And I had a friend who was working on emergent language with some stuff at Carnegie Mellon, and he's like, should I be quitting my PhD? Like, these are serious questions people think about. And it's like, okay, at the end of the day, it's a mathematical tool. How are you going to use it? There are lots of ethical questions like that. Yeah. It's just math, and how
Yeah, I guess my insight would be that for some new technology that has effects that are more bodily or like physical or visible, I guess sometimes we're able to see, okay, well, that will have some bad consequences. With these technologies that have like more subtle, more invisible, more spiritual effects, I mean, it's kind of hard to kind of say, okay, hold on, nobody uses it until our little board of experts have determined if it's good or not. So I think it's just, it exists, and now we have to figure out how to use it well. Yeah.
Also, just because it is math doesn't mean we understand it. So like, even the most basic models, neural networks, essentially it's just multiplying and adding numbers. But it's the sort of thing where the practice came before the theory, and it's not clear exactly what goes on underneath the covers. And then you get some mathematical theory after the fact, but you don't know exactly what's going to happen because your data is contingent and you don't know what's in the data. And so you have problems with AI bias because there are biases built into your data sets. You have problems with AI alignment, like with language models. Is it going to give you what you want as the human? And you have to have some sort of human feedback to actually say, this is the sort of output I want. And those are active areas of research that are not easy. So,
I guess we're supposed to test everything and retain what is good. I see a tendency for people to look at AI in a very narrow manner, especially just to get out of it what you're looking for, or use it as a tool for efficiency, so as to do other things that are more fun or better, such as contemplation. But I think if we look at this optimistically as a tool oriented toward the good, we can use it to work toward deeper contemplation. We can use it to work toward building community. I don't have the exact answers for that, but I've actually started working on that to some degree in discernment of charisms and assistance in helping someone think more deeply about their own narrative and helping people think differently about the way that they communicate with one another and how they could use their gifts towards the common good. So I think that we shouldn't be hesitant to embrace a new tool to test to see what is good, but I also understand the huge potential negative consequences that we do not see. So I think if we're vigilant in creating guardrails and how we prompt and how we leverage the tool to create bots or to create a different kind of tool out of the large language models, that we can really see fruit that we're oriented towards in this conversation, oriented toward fraternity, equality, liberty, creating a governance system, helping us create a governance system that is oriented toward the common good. So I just wanted to offer that as a thought, that we are to test everything and retain what is good, and to be optimistic with our approach to it, understanding the liabilities that are also risks.
As one of the oldest people in this room, I remember before we had televisions. I remember before we had phones that we walked around with. I remember before we had iPads. if you would go back 20 years and tell the average person that you would see virtually everybody walking around the street talking to themselves, they'd say you're nuts. If you would say you could ask questions of where they about where they're going to go. When I was in Congress in the 80s, my brother was working for a company called TRW. He came in to lobby me on behalf of TRW. They wanted to put up a subset of satellites, 8 satellites, to try out this GPS system. Maybe it would tell us within 6 feet of where our military were. Nobody talked about some woman talking to me about what street to turn on and when to go there, and that I could change which woman is talking to me and which accent she had. These are all things that were revolutionary. I'm serious. If you could see the difference between now and then, it's phenomenal. You know, if I would come up to Berkeley 25 years ago and I saw people talking to themselves, I knew I was in Berkeley. Now it's everywhere, and you're not stopped by it. So, I mean, television is good or bad, right? What's on there, the way you use it, determines whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. The same thing with your cell phone. You can have pornography on there and be watching that. It's a bad thing. You can have inspiration to help you with meditation and contemplation. You can hear someone reciting the Psalms as you sit under a tree someplace. Maybe maybe I have seen all these things, so it doesn't bother me so much. So I mean, I know there are challenges with AI, but I think we make a mistake if we build up too much of a challenge there. It seems to me our objective is to make sure it's used for good purposes. So, you know, you get wrapped up in technology, but it also comes down to what are first principles, what are the values you're looking for, what are you trying to establish? And as I heard a lecture in a Catholic men's group a few weeks ago, they said, and he was addressing men, so that's what he said, men, our job is to get ourselves and our families to heaven. You know, is the use of AI going to help me do that or not? I think it depends on how I use it.
I think the last thing was, let's thank our student panelists again. And then they can go back to their seats, and I think Father Albert was going to give us some concluding remarks.
I don't know if our Dean Scott wanted to come up as well. Concluding remarks are just really to thank you all for being here in attendance today for our great discussions. We want this to flow out into the world. This is not just an activity for a day, but a conversation that we would like to continue. So we encourage you in that score. Tell people about the DSPT. Tell people about what you've heard today. We are going to conclude with a mass. We recently had some water damage over the way in a chapel. So the mass is going to take place in our Chapel of Ease, which is classroom 1. We'll get that set up in the next 20 minutes or so. There's time to continue to mingle on your way out, but please join us for Mass if you'd like. It will be the anticipated Mass of Sunday, so it counts for Sunday. We do this as a special bonus for our fellows who have traveled in and maybe traveling tomorrow on their way out, so it's a traveler's Mass in that respect. But please do join us. Again, thank you for coming. Scott, I don't know if you want to come up or you're wondering whether you should come up, but yes, you should come up.
I will keep my concluding remarks to a good 20 or 30 minutes, so don't worry. No, I really just want to conclude with two remarks. I just want to conclude with two remarks. The first one is very short. Thank you. A profound thank you to all of the priests here in the Dominicans on the West Coast, to all the faculty members, students, and of course to the fellows, and again especially to Father Sweeney and Father Albert. So thank you very much. And maybe just I'll let Leo XIV have the last word. Just as a way of maybe sort of recapitulating a lot of the themes I've heard, from contemplative and active to what wisdom is, what relationality is, what the role of friendship. So here's a short quote from a recent Wednesday audience from Leo XIV. The word possesses a revelatory dimension that creates a relationship with the other. In this way, by speaking to us, God reveals himself to us as an ally who invites us into friendship with him. If Jesus calls us to be friends, let us not leave this call unheeded. Let us welcome it. Let us take care of this relationship, and we will discover that friendship with God is our salvation. So maybe we'll leave it with that.